Last year's Poco F3 was a really popular mid-ranger, and now we have the sequel, the Poco F4. A lot of Xiaomi's mid-rangers and smartphones in general have been bringing only small incremental changes this year. So what is actually new with the Poco F4, and is it worth upgrading to? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our full review. The Poco F3 was a great all-round mid-range phone that brought a well-balanced set of features, as well as a flagship-killing chipset, and the Poco F4 follows the same formula. Not a ton has changed since last year, and that's been the recurring theme of 2022 phones. The most notable upgrades are a new main camera and faster charging, and Dolby Vision support. The looks of the F4 are pretty conservative, but the flat and mirror-like back panel spices things up a little bit. The back is made of glass, but it isn't Gorilla Glass 5 like last year. The frame is plastic here, and the phone feels solid in the hand. Just like last year's Poco F3, you get IP53 rated protection against dust and light splashes of water. The Poco F4's display is the same too, almost. It's again a 6.67-inch E4 AMOLED with a 1080p resolution, Gorilla Glass 5 protection, and a 120Hz refresh rate. But this time around you get Dolby Vision support, in addition to HDR10+, for a more immersive HDR streaming experience. The display is sharp, contrasty, and pretty color accurate. It's also very bright. We measured a maximum of 530 nits with the manual brightness slider, and this boosts up to 1000 nits in auto mode when in bright conditions. And thanks to the 120Hz refresh rate, swiping and scrolling looks very fluid on screen, and it will dial down when you're not interacting with it to save energy. There's support for high frame rate gaming too, and the panel is extra responsive when you're playing a game thanks to a 360Hz touch sampling rate. For audio, the Poco F4 has a pair of stereo speakers, and this year they have Dolby Atmos support. They scored a good mark in our loudness test, and the sound quality is good too. The Poco F4 has a side-mounted fingerprint reader for your biometrics, and is fast and reliable. And you can opt for 128 or 256 gigs of onboard storage. This isn't expandable though. The interface of the Poco F4 is Xiaomi's MIUI 13. It's based on Android 12 here, but it's pretty much the same as what you'd find on all of Xiaomi's recent phones. You can find out more about the specific features of MIUI 13 in our dedicated video. Let's talk about what's under the hood of the Poco F4. It's the same chipset as last year, a high-end Snapdragon 870. Even though it's not a brand new chip, it is still quite competitive when it comes to both CPU and GPU performance. In benchmarks, the Poco F4 tops the mid-range charts, and there's more than enough power here for heavy gaming and multitasking. The Poco F4 also has an upgraded passive cooling system, which is much larger than last year's model. Sustained performance is great here, with good stability in our testing. But for some reason, the phone did become quite warm, even toasty during the process. Battery life is another difference you'll find here compared to the Poco F3, even though both phones have about the same battery capacity at around 4500 mAh. The Poco F4 scored a final endurance rating of 101 hours in our tests, a bit lower than the F3, but still pretty good. On the other hand, the charging has been upgraded to 67 watts over last year's 33. It's a lot faster. We were able to charge the Poco F4 from 0 to 92% in half an hour. The final major changes we'll talk about on the Poco F4 are with the cameras. This year you get a higher resolution and stabilization on the main cam, but the macro cam has been downgraded. Overall, the setup includes a 64 megapixel main cam with OIS, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide cam, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. During the day, 16 megapixel photos from the main cam have a good amount of detail and balanced processing. We like the contrast and color presentation, and the dynamic range is outstanding. Our only nitpick is that these could be a little bit sharper. Portraits look good, with nice exposure and spot-on colors. The subject separation isn't perfect, but is proficient enough. 8 megapixel photos from the ultra-wide are great. The images have a natural look, okay sharpness, true-to-life colors, and great dynamic range. 2 megapixel shots from the macro cam are just okay. The level of detail is what you'd expect at this resolution, and the noise reduction is adequate. In low light situations, the Poco F4 will enable an auto night mode for the main cam. These photos are pretty good. They're well exposed, with low noise, saturated colors, and commendable dynamic range. If you manually disable the night mode, the results are darker and noisier. There's also supposed to be an auto night mode on the ultra-wide cam, but it never seemed to kick in. These are the results we got. They're dark, noisy, desaturated, and lacking in detail. You can force the night mode on, and you'll get brighter photos with slightly less noise, but they're still desaturated. Selfies from the 20 megapixel front-facing cam are good. There's enough detail and sharpness, accurate colors, low noise, and good dynamic range. The Poco F4 can record video in up to 4K resolution at 60 FPS with its main cam. The quality is good, with plenty of detail, balanced sharpening, realistic colors, and outstanding dynamic range. The contrast could be better though. Also, there's always-on electronic stabilization, and it doesn't work very well combined with the main cam's OIS. You get non-stop focus hunting. The ultra-wide is limited to 1080p, and its video quality is decent, with an adequate level of detail, realistic-looking colors, and wide dynamic range. The contrast leaves more to be desired. So that's the Poco F4. It's a nice mid-range package with a flagship-killing chipset, a nice AMOLED screen, decent cameras, solid battery life, and fast charging, all at a pretty attractive price too. Not a lot has changed since last year, and the F4 probably isn't worth upgrading to over the previous model. That's pretty much the 2022 smartphone scene in general. But still, if you're in the market for a mid-ranger, the F4 is a pretty competitive one, and it's worth recommending. Thanks for watching guys, stay safe and see you on the next one.